Steve Moran here with another episode of Foresight TV. I'm actually not really going to be on today. Bob Kramer and Caroline Pearson are going to be talking about the middle market, probably one of the most important things to be talking about. And so after this, I'm going to turn it over to them and step off the stage. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. Bob, Caroline, I can hardly wait for the conversation, and it's all yours.
All right. Thanks, Steve. And I'm delighted to have Caroline Pearson joining me. Caroline is at NORC at the University of Chicago and has a long, extensive background and done a lot of work in health policy research. And over the last, I don't know how many years it's been exactly now, 5 or 6 years, Caroline, she and her team have done a number of studies in the area of the middle market and seniors housing more broadly, and particularly the Forgotten Middle study, which was sponsored by NIC, and really coined the phrase and brought into a spotlight the whole issue of the middle market and the growth of the middle market. So we're going to talk about that some today, but we're also going to talk not only about that market, but what's rising up to serve that market and what are some of the opportunities there, as well as some of the challenges. And first, maybe I'll just ask you, Caroline, just give our viewers just a brief overview of what is NORC at the University of Chicago, and just tell us a little bit about the kind of work you and your team do.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bob. So NORC at the University of Chicago is an 80-year-old nonprofit research institution. And we do a lot of work in the healthcare as well as other spaces. And much of our work has served the federal government, but in the last 5 to 10 years, we've been really expanding to bring great research to other audiences. And my team is really focused on this sort of broader healthcare environment. Mm-hmm. And serving plans, providers, seniors housing providers, et cetera.
Great. Well, let's get right into our topic, our focus. You know, why do you see the focus that has evolved over the last 5 years or so on the middle market, and give us a sense of both what do we mean by middle market, and secondly, what's unique about this market?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think when we started out this research, it was really motivated to shine a spotlight on this middle income group who, by definition, have fewer options available to them for both health and housing as they age. And it was really their sort of dearth of options. I mean, on the high end, we've got a robust private pay seniors housing, as well as, a variety of home care and home health services available to people. Mm-hmm. And for lower income individuals, we've got, subsidized housing, there's Medicaid, long-term care and home and community-based services. But for everybody else who may not be able to afford to move into the sort of assisted living options that existed, at least when we started this project, mm-hmm. The options become slim quickly. And so we really wanted to sort of understand that middle income cohort and their needs, and sort of what resources they have to pay for more support as they age.
Well, tell us a little bit about then how big is this market? And define it a little bit more. I mean, I think I'm hearing you saying it's basically that group between those who can afford the private pay options that are out there today and those that are eligible for subsidized options, whether it's housing options or whether or not that's subsidized care options through Medicaid.
Yep.
So tell us just a little bit more about the size of this market, and is this market changing over the next 10 years? Are we seeing any significant movement in its size, and what it's looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. So we did define the market, as you said, really based on sort of the lack of eligibility for Medicaid and the likely unaffordability of existing private pay seniors housing. And so that left us really focused on what is people between the 41st and 80th percentile of income, which for regular people who operate in dollars, not percentiles, is roughly folks earning about $25,000 a year, all the way up to 75,000 or even more for some of the older individuals. And it's interesting because people have said, $75,000, $80,000 a year doesn't sound like middle class to me. But when you look at it in the context of the options that they have available, that's a group who struggles to afford to pay for their housing and their care in certain markets, certainly. And so as we got into the research, I mean, what we found is, particularly as the baby boomers are aging, this is a cohort that is set to grow dramatically. Today, we've got about 8 million folks in that market, in the middle market, and that's going to grow to about 14.5 million by 2029.
And what's this? Is this 75 and over?
Great question. These are folks 75 and older. And importantly, the oldest baby boomers are only 83. So if you think about the seniors housing market really serving an even older cohort, an 85 plus cohort, we're sort of at the tip of the iceberg, even within our study timeframe. But
and your study timeframe, when you say 83, that's in what year is that?
2029. So we released in 2019, and we projected forward 10 years to what will the market look like 10 years out, and that's where we see about 14.5 million folks over 75 in the year 2029.
Why did you title it The Forgotten Middle? Just explain, what are you calling attention to with that title?
Yeah, I mean, we are really focusing on the fact that this is an unserved market today. And I guess I should say, when we released the study, I'm happy to say we've seen a lot of progress since then, and I know we're going to talk about that. But
2019 when you released it.
In 2019, when we released the study, we had sort of policy people and folks on the Medicaid side really focused on the needs of lower income. We have a whole robust industry focused on high income, and everybody forgot the multitude of folks in the middle, which is really actually the biggest cohort of seniors in the future.
Yeah. Growing from, at the time you did the study, let's see, we were talking about a little over 8 million and growing to over 14 million. Is that right?
To over 14 million in the next 10 years and more to come behind that. Yeah, absolutely.
So almost doubling in size.
Correct.
And how does this compare to the size of those below and those above? In other words, is this right in the middle? Is this going to be the largest market in the future in terms of where the demand is?
Yeah, great question. Let's start with today. So sort of today, the cohort is sort of evenly split. So you had about 8 million low income, 8 million middle income, and 4 million high income. Now, the great news is that as we project forward to 2029, the size of the low income population stays almost the same. And that's really a credit to the improvements that we've seen in education, particularly the completion of high school education. The middle market becomes the biggest cohort. 14.5 million is going to be far and away the biggest group. They'll comprise about 43% of all seniors in 2029. And then the high income group is also growing, again, due to higher education and largely higher education and attainment.
So describe a little bit in terms of what's different about this middle market. In other words, tell us a little bit about their demographics, family structures, savings, and how this then relates to their health and housing needs as we look to the future.
Yeah, several things. I mean, so first of all, not just the middle market, the composition of all of our future seniors are changing, but especially the middle market. We see the proportion of racial and ethnic minority groups increasing from only about 9% of the population today to 16% in the future. And so we know that's going to be critical in terms of thinking about how we meet the needs of those individuals in a culturally competent way. And then when we think about caregiving, it's really important, as we know, to look at first at marital status. And so future seniors are much less likely to be married than seniors today. The marriage rates are going to be down to about 52% of the population, which is about 10 percentage points lower than we see today. And of course, we know spouses are the number one sort of first line of caregiving support for a lot of folks. And then we also know that folks are having fewer children, and that those children are less likely to live nearby. So again, as we think about specifically a cohort of individuals who, by and large, are relying on unpaid services because they can't necessarily afford private pay, they may not have as many familial supports available to them as they rely on in today's seniors.
So what are some of the implications there for them meeting their health and housing needs with the picture that you've just painted?
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to sort of remain in your home, right? Many of these folks do own their home, fortunately. But as mobility declines, as folks have health needs, they're trying to remain in their homes, and they're not able to necessarily live completely independently. They may not be able to afford to have home care and health care come into their homes on a daily or weekly basis. And so typically it is going to be, first wives and then daughters and daughters-in-law who are going to be essential in providing those services. And as we think about a growing population who may not have family available to them, or maybe solo agers, I know that's something that you've focused on a lot. We need to have other options available to support them, right? We can't just assume folks are going to be okay on their own and in their homes.
Well, then, so you've got this good size, but growing, almost doubling in size from the time of you released your study. And that was a study that was underwritten by NIC, the National Investment Center for Seniors Housing and Care. But how is that profile of that middle market customer changing in your study period to 2029? And what does this mean for the current seniors housing and care sector? In other words, where's the opportunity, and what is it going to mean if this group's going to be served?
Yeah. So, I mean, several things. First of all, we know that the group is growing. And one of the reasons the middle market is growing is because the savings patterns have changed, right? That's the other thing we didn't talk about. So obviously during this period, we've got folks primarily moving to defined contribution retirement savings as opposed to pensions and other things.
Defined benefit, yeah.
Right. And so, we need to be thinking about how do we serve them within the resources that are available to them. And what I think is interesting is if you are someone who is trying to sort of conserve resources, and we should point out that there may be higher income seniors who are also interested in preserving their resources, right, and not overspending. We've got a lot of folks with that as sort of part of their cultural DNA. We need to meet them with what seems like affordable options. And I don't think that we're going to see all of these middle market folks choosing to move into, seniors housing communities for lifestyle reasons. I really think that largely they are going to move out of their homes when there is a healthcare need or sort of a mobility need that makes it hard for them to live independently. Right? This is not a lifestyle choice as much as a lifestyle demand. And so that integration of housing and care is essential if you want to serve this market. We're not going to, we need to say to people, we have a safer, more supportive environment for you to live in at a time when you need it at a price point that you can afford. And so that's really the opportunity. And I think just the size of that growth and sort of value proposition is something that really spoke to audiences as we rolled out the data. I mean, I've done a lot of research in my career, and I have never seen such a sort of emotional response to any research as I have to this study. I mean, people were sort of stunned both by the opportunity and by the void, right? People were like,
Yeah.
What do we do? How can this be, right? And the answer at the time was, this is really the situation, and we don't have great options. But fortunately, Nick and Bob, you were smart enough to tell us to project into the future. We have time to catch up, and I'm just delighted to see that we're starting to get some traction on that.
Well, let's talk for a moment then. In a way, your study and even the phrase "the forgotten middle" sort of put this group and this issue on the map.
Yeah.
But talk about, from the point of view of policymakers, what's been the reaction to the study, and we can talk about the industry and how they've reacted. I want to spend some time on that, but let's first of all look at it from a policymaker point of view. What are some of the implications of the study, and what's been some of the reactions?
Yeah, I mean, what became really clear when we identified the need was that this is a big group, it's a big unmet need, and it was probably not going to be served by industry alone and not by policy alone, right? We really are going to need sort of multifaceted solutions. As someone who's worked in DC for most of my career, policymakers generally focus on safety net programs, right? I mean, we've thought of that as the safety net, and so middle market is sort of outside the purview of policymakers. But I think as the study came out, it has really sort of captured both the imagination and the fear of the policy community to see what they view as sort of impending crisis, right? We've got millions of aging baby boomers who potentially are going to be left in their homes without appropriate resources, right? And that's not a good scenario for any of us. And so we have really seen this take hold. I mean, it is interesting. I now get invited to speak and to do panels, and people say, well, Caroline is going to talk about what is widely known as the forgotten middle. Well, Bob, you and I made up that term, and I am delighted that it is widely known that way, but it speaks to how compelling the problem is. And so from a policy point of view, we have really started to see some traction. I mean, I think on the one hand, the sort of Medicaid folks view this as a spend down risk, right? I mean, currently, people say, well, like, worst case scenario, what happens to these folks? And the answer is they don't get the care and support that they need in a safe environment. And eventually their health deteriorates. They end up in a nursing home. They spend down their assets, and they qualify for Medicaid.
And in one sense, everyone loses, because the tab for the much higher level of care that they need is increased. They suffer diminished quality of life. That causes all kinds of stress through their family, and so and ultimately it means more government dollars are going to have to be spent, because by the time they're getting care, it's a much higher level of care that they're needing.
Correct. Absolutely. Couldn't have said that better. And so I think, the notion, and to be fair, right, there's been a long sense of, even the whole premise of home and community-based waivers, right, in Medicaid was, gosh, I think if we took better care of people before they reached a nursing home, we could probably, keep them out of that nursing home longer. And I think this is the same premise, right? How do we build a system that meets the needs of individuals where they are? So I think the policymakers have reacted. There's also been a lot of focus on where can we get other funding, right? There's no funding right now for the forgotten middle, and we are certainly going to need some funding. So lots of interest in how Medicare Advantage can play a role. And there's certainly, I think everyone's aware of the new flexibility around supplemental benefits. And so thinking about how can we use supplemental benefits to, whether it's do in-home modifications, pay for home care, partner with seniors housing communities, right, to give other care that's going to keep people healthy. And then I think there's a whole set of relatively unexplored policy around the housing space, right? What does HUD policy look like? Where are Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac in all of this? And sort of what are the other options that we can bring to the table to meet the needs?
Well, let's talk some, if we can, about the response from industry, and I'll say industry more broadly. In other words, from the private sector. So as we've just talked for a moment from the point of view of policymakers and public policy. And I think one of the findings, if I can say, from your study was that this is not an all private sector solution or all public sector solution. The public sector has a vested interest in having the private sector tackle this issue, but the private sector, particularly for those in what I'll call for the moment sort of the lower half of the middle, the public sector has a huge vested interest, because otherwise, by the time these people spend down, they're sicker and they need a higher degree of care, and it's more costly, and their health has really suffered in the meantime. But talk some about what you've seen as, more broadly speaking, the industry response. And then I'd like to kind of drill down with you some on what, that came out in 2019. And let me just say, for those watching, it was the fifth most read article in Health Affairs, a leading health policy magazine, in all of 2019. So congratulations to you and your team. I think that's and again, sort of bringing an issue out of nowhere and suddenly having it be for the fifth most read issue is that's sort of coming out of nowhere. So yeah. Congratulations to you and your team. But talk now some, and let's get into how has the industry responded? What have you seen, and what's coming out? What are some common themes and so forth?
Great. So let's talk big picture, then we can drill down. I mean, I think, I will honestly say, I said, there was a huge emotional reaction initially, but then we got into we organized some panels and some discussion groups, right, on sort of what could you do? And it wasn't optimistic at first, Bob. I was very nervous that we had shown a big bright light on a problem that no one felt that they could solve. And we heard from a bunch of folks it's impossible. We're interested, we'd love to do it, but our investors will never accept lower returns. We can't figure out how to finance it, et cetera. And I'm delighted to say that in the last 3 years, in spite of all that initial skepticism, we've actually seen a ton of companies coming out and saying, we're launching new products in this market. And what's remarkable is actually they're coming from both ends. So to your point on sort of this, there's the low middle income and there's the high middle income. Or middle market, and you've got Lloyd Jones recently, who's typically doing Class A work, launching Sage Hill, right? So coming sort of down in price point from their typical, and then you've got Two Life launching Opus, building from what is typically affordable for them and spreading up. So I think that's a fantastic model to see it working at both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah. So Two Life, for those of you who are not familiar, is an affordable housing provider in the greater Boston area. And very, in other words, there are a lot of submarkets in the forgotten middle is one of the points I think you're making in what you've just said.
Yeah, and it's
well, let's let's sort of look at more. What are the values of this group? And I know it's a large group, but in other words, do you see any differences between the product that serves, if you want, the private pay higher end, and what this customer who's part of this forgotten middle, what's most important to them, and what are they trying to get as they seek to stretch their dollars?
Yeah. So I think, number one, as I said, I do think healthcare is going to be a motivating factor, and it's not a universal view. Some folks think that there is sort of a lifestyle draw, and there may be, but I think for many people, they're going to be motivated to look around at the point that they don't feel that they can live independently. So that's important in the value proposition. I think that this next generation is not interested in always in the highest end, most amenities available, right? They have lived more modest lives, and they are going to be comfortable continuing that way. And then they really value savings, right? I mean, they are middle income because they've had defined contribution. They've made those contributions. They've worked hard. And many of them may want to retain some of those assets and savings in order to pass them down to the next generation. So, I think, and we can chat, I think there's like lots of ways that companies are reimagining
Mhm.
the products that will meet this audience. So if you're ready,
Yeah.
I have 3Bs for you.
All right. Well, let me just point out one thing in what you're saying and a little bit of pushback, because you know me, it wouldn't be an interview if I didn't push back with you some. But yes, healthcare or care needs, I agree, are often the sort of precipitating reason. But I also want to talk about the solo ager and the explosive growth in solo agers. Solo agers meaning they don't have a spouse, or the spouse has passed away. And even though they may have children, those children there are fewer of them. They may live far away, or they may be estranged, and those kids aren't involved in their lives. But I just want to push back a little bit in that I also think there are people for whom, though living at home and staying in a community sounds nice, when you reach a certain age and all your friends have died and moved away and you're living alone, that can be a sentence, not an opportunity. And
Fair
so I think for many solo agers, the idea of being in community, having easier access to do things they've always been able to do, but maybe now where either mobility or just driving at least is really compromised, living at home can be more like a sentence than an opportunity. So I do think that's another aspect of this, because of the explosive growth in this cohort of not just childless, it's more than that, but solo agers for whatever reason.
That's true. And Bob, it's interesting. You and I always talk about the divide between housing and healthcare. And in the healthcare world, loneliness and social isolation is one of the most important sort of hot topics of the day. We've suddenly woken up. We understand that social isolation and loneliness has huge medical healthcare effects and costs. And yet haven't quite seen us make that last leap, which is, sure, we think everyone should remain in their homes, but if that home is exacerbating the social isolation and loneliness problems that we have, it's not solving our healthcare problem.
Yeah, if it's turning you into a shut-in that's not getting the things you need for a worthwhile quality of life. Well, let's switch then to your 3Bs, was it?
3Bs,
Okay.
just for the sake of a fun
Okay.
organizing principle. Bricks, breakfast, and bingo.
Okay.
Okay. This is just, I look around, right? Is the industry solving a lower cost structure, right? A middle market product. How are they succeeding?
Right.
So starting with bricks, I think what is interesting, Lloyd Jones, their recent announcement about their new middle market, right? They are purchasing older, distressed buildings at lower cost. That's a theme that we've heard from multiple properties, and it's one that really, I think, COVID created more opportunity around. Right, there was both the economic situation, but also some concern around congregate living during the pandemic. Created the opportunity to get the right price point for some of these existing properties that then they're renovating, right? We sort of have universally heard you can't build new build and get to the price point that you need to be here. So that's one. And I think also within sort of the bricks and the sort of structural approach, we hear a lot about can we make the units smaller? Can we create more communal space? This is a group, to your point, right, who may really value community over individualism. And so that can also play into getting some of those rent costs down in a way that's really compelling.
Okay.
But
bricks. Next B.
Breakfast. It's interesting. Food service comes up in almost every discussion about how to solve for middle market, and it's just such a cost driver for properties. And so we see a lot of different solutions coming into play. Right. One is can we eliminate kitchens and work with vendor partners to bring food in? Another is, are we choosing locations that are centrally located with other food options available around them, right? So some food comes in, but also residents can go out, and it is flexible. But generally speaking, I think most middle market properties are trying to not serve 3 meals a day. They're maybe serving one meal a day. They've got food coming in, but they have to rethink the way that we're doing food service, because it's a huge part of the operating costs that keep rent high.
So the fine linens and personal service at your table with a menu of many different types of food that you can choose from may not be. Talk there just for a moment about the difference between a options approach versus a value approach, and the role of value to this customer we're serving in the middle market.
Right. I mean, I think you middle market folks, I don't need to sit down at a restaurant meal with a menu of choice every 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, right? It's not how it worked in my home kitchen. And, some of the interesting analogies, it's also not how it works at most hotel chains anymore. You think about someone who's potentially traveled for business, they're very accustomed to waking up, grab and go breakfasts and hit the road. So I think, it is fewer options, but it is, if there are flexible options, it's something that people value.
Flexibility that still gives them choice, but where they get to make the choices of where they want to spend the money.
That's right.
That's
right. Great
well, let's get to your third B.
Third B, bingo.
Okay.
Just reimagining staffing model, right, and amenities. So I think on amenities, again, we hear a lot of focus on these middle market properties may not have full amenities on site, but if we locate them in intelligent ways where there's lots going on in the community, right, we can rely on the community. We don't have to be everything for everyone at every minute of the day. And
that speaks also, let me just say, between a sort of a separatist isolationist view of that property versus an integrated view of the property and therefore the residents as much as possible into their surrounding community. Exactly. So, yeah. And Carrie, I'm sorry, I interrupted. No, we'll keep going. We have a few more minutes. Steve is just reminding us that the clock is ticking. So thank you, Steve.
I think the last point is tied to that, right, is staffing. And so we've heard people say, we don't have necessarily a full-time activity director, but we've got volunteers. And in fact, we have residents that volunteer and that are a key part of our workforce. And again, speak to how do we bring down operating costs in a way that's engaging and purposeful. Bob, I'll use your P word, right? Everybody needs purpose, and it's going to be key for this cohort as well.
So that type of engagement, volunteerism, both bringing down the cost, but also creating more of a sense of community at the same time because of the role. So I just want to maybe chat for a couple of moments then about what you see, and I have some thoughts. What are sort of the key features of these communities? In other words, you came out with a report in 2019. We're now 2022. What have you seen as the response? And if you had to say, what are some of the key things that developers and operators are trying to provide now to serve this middle market? What are some key features about it?
I mean, I think that they are trying to serve with a flexible community model. That is both integrated, creates real community within the walls of the property, right? But also in the broader community writ large. Just like you said, not isolationist, but fully integrated, both for efficiency and for well-being.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would add to that. I think, perhaps ironically, this middle market product is often more sensitive to being truly resident driven because they don't have unlimited dollars. So, it's really important to get right what the residents are looking for, because they want to make sure their dollars go for that and not things that either, well, I want choice. For instance, they want to be able to choose what they spend their dollars on because they want them to count for them. Whereas many of our luxury senior living communities, we offer you everything. And by the way, that's why our monthly rates are so expensive. So as we're going to bring down those rates, it means more a la carte, which and in terms of options, but it also means more, I want things to go for what I consider valuable to me, not what the operator has decided I should spend my monies in an all-inclusive package. So it means a lot more a la carte, I think. But to me, it's really driven by what the resident values. And I would say secondarily, depending on the level of care provided, what the family members value. So I think those are just some, but I would add a couple of other things. I think one of the things you see in these communities is that people didn't expect is there's much more going to not having as many staff, but having the staff being universal workers. In other words, you don't have, the dollars aren't there to have everybody just hired to do their one thing. So you have what's called a universal worker, but the job satisfaction of those universal workers, which nobody anticipated, is off the charts. They so love being, because then you're really involved with the lives of your residents and you're enabling them to do what they want to do rather than having a set program that you're kind of saying, these are the activities, so to speak. So, I think, obviously strict expense control, but if you're going to do that and attract a customer, you've got to listen very carefully to the customers, to what they value, what they want their dollars to go for. And because I think there's having everything wrapped into one overall monthly fee is not a model that's going to be successful serving this market. Yeah. And yet at the same time, this market, folks want value, but it's what do they feel is a good spending of their money. So bundled packages are not going to be a big seller. And they're also usually financially not going to be practical. So it's a very value-oriented customer. And then it's pared down offerings in terms of the menu, but it's not pared down quality. And that's important. And those that view it as we can offer less, and that means we don't have to worry about quality, are going to be proved, I think, flat out wrong. And the market's going to reject them big time. So you got to be able to deliver quality, but it's really, we classically in this industry and others have had focus groups, but this is where focus groups are really key, because you better be providing the things that resident values and not 6 other things that they have to pay for that they honestly just don't value. And then the last area that I'm afraid we're going to run out of time to really talk about, I would say, is the importance of relationships with third parties to meet the whole life needs of your residents. In other words, you're not giving them everything through what you provide at the community for the rate that you're charging. But this is particularly true when it comes to things like home care services and other health care, and having partners there. So to me, those are just some of the things, but I would sort of say in particular, you can, with a high-end product, you're offering choice, but you're paying for all that choice. With the middle market, you've got to listen much more carefully to your customer, because they don't want to pay for something they don't see as valuable to them. And so they want that, they want to, it's investing in the things that are valuable to your residents and to your family members. So, well, let me, just because Steve's going to get nervous otherwise, let me just ask Caroline, if I'm a classic senior living developer and I'm looking to do a middle market product, what advice would you have based upon the research you've done and led at NORC, in terms of what are the things that developer or that operator that says, I better develop a middle market product, I hear it's hot? What advice would you give them?
Well, in the spirit of time and Steve being nervous to get us off, I will say they should do it. The opportunity is huge. We've proven it's possible, and get after it.
Great.
Steve, to you.
This has been a great conversation. One of the things I found myself thinking as I'm listening, first off, it's a good thing I wasn't on, because I had a lot I could have said. But the one thing I would say that really occurred to me was, I find myself believing as this becomes more mainstream, that a curious thing is going to happen, and that the luxury folks are going to start looking at how the middle market are delivering and saying, that's a better way to do it than this all-inclusive package, Bob, that you particularly talked about. Mm-hmm. So it is. I know it's a trying time for senior living right now. I think it is the most exciting time there's ever been in the industry. There's so much opportunity to invent, reinvent. We talked a little bit before we went on about Disney, and we just see some things that are really, really cool going on. And so I'm very, very optimistic. Caroline,
Yeah, and I would close with that, just saying, Steve, that I think this middle market customer, they're looking for value, peace of mind, but also independence. And that, recognizing that independence, I actually think the middle market customer and the product that they're going to ultimately choose is going to bring back more strongly the role of the resident and their choice. Even though it's a thing where the developer operator's got to be they've got to be very expense conscious. Otherwise, the market can't afford their product. But to me, that's, like, for instance, volunteerism, which we haven't talked about, is going to play a key role in delivering this product. But it also, that very volunteerism of the residents leads to a more engaged community and to a sense of community and a sense that this is my home rather than this is a luxury hotel that I've checked into for the last 2 years of my life. This is much more not I'm here to be served, but I'm here to take an active role in what the final years of my life are going to look like. And I think, to me, that's exciting, because it means that you don't have activity coordinators. You have, as Merrill Gardens talks about it with their product, residents experience partners. They're to come alongside and partner with the residents to create the type of experience the residents want. And, that's a different way of thinking. We've had a very kind of almost patronizing, we'll give you all the things you need for the final years of your life. I actually think the middle market product is going to disrupt that way of thinking about, and it's going to put the residents much more in control. Yes, partly for cost reasons, but also because you better be delivering what that resident values. So I think that's exciting. What I'm saying is, as a final comment, the middle market product will disrupt the type of product that the current upper market offers.
Absolutely. Yep.
And so I'll stop there.
Well, Caroline, thank you very much. And fascinating conversation. It sounds like we are going to need a part 2 on this. So with that, we are going to sign off.